Hey, this is Pastor Quincy Wheeler, and I'm here with another video study guide for episode 5 of season 1 of The Chosen. The Chosen is a free TV series about the life of Jesus, and you can find it on the Chosen app if you download that from any app store on your smartphone. You can also find it on the internet. We'll have those links in the description of this video if you want to check them out. So, episode 5 is called The Wedding Gift, and it opens up with this flashback scene of Jesus in Jerusalem as a 12-year-old, which is found in Luke chapter 2. A couple of great things about this scene. I love the feeling of panic that every parent has if you don't know exactly where your child is. And of course, Mary and Joseph have had this panic for a while, considering what they know about Jesus and having lost him for 3 days. And so we see very similar progression of Jesus saying, "Didn't you know I have to be about my Father's business?" Jesus saying, "If not now, when?" Like, God's put me here for a reason. I want to be about that reason. And then his parents kind of talking to him and explaining, "Hey, help us get through this. Help us be your parents." And I also love that moment where Joseph says, "We'll see" to Jesus when Jesus asked to read. Everybody's heard their parents say, "We'll see." So a lot of great insights here into a relationship between Jesus and his parents, and then Joseph saying, "Hey, your punishment is going to be you have to rub your mom's feet." And I really enjoyed this whole little section here, just kind of giving us a glimpse into Jesus and his parents. So we then flash to Mary headed to Cana. Cana is a village that's pretty close to Nazareth. And if you ever get the chance to go to Israel, most likely you'll get a chance to see Cana right after you visit Nazareth. If you go on a tour of the Holy Land, a pilgrimage there. So that's a similar kind of concept here. Mary knows somebody. She's friends with somebody in Cana. She goes there to help them prepare for their wedding. Then we get this scene between Nicodemus and John the Baptist. Nicodemus has gone out there to interrogate, so to speak, John the Baptist. And we see some tension between the two of them. John says, "Hey, I'm preparing the way for the Messiah." Remember how when Caesar was coming in, they said, "Hey, clear the highways, prepare the way. He's coming in." Even more so, we need to be ready for the Messiah. And he goes after Nicodemus for the cost of his garments. And we just see that John the Baptist here in the scene is very much like he is in Scripture. He's not willing to just let things slide. He goes directly at the issue. And Nicodemus, disturbed by that, a little put off, and they kind of have to work that through. Then we go to a scene where Simon returns to talk to his wife Eden after he's received this calling from Jesus and received this catch of fish that's going to pay off his bills. I love the tension in this scene that's resolved, where you see Eden just excited for this calling that's been placed on Simon's life. And, we don't know anything about Simon's wife in Scripture, but we do know that Paul references that Simon has a wife who accompanies him, who's with him. And so the fact that he went with Jesus and was married, it indicates that she was supportive of him in this ministry. And I love seeing that in this scene. Simon references the story of Elijah and Elisha. And it's a great story to reference because it is reminiscent of how Jesus calls his followers. Jesus is not calling followers in a similar way that rabbis would acquire students. And that's referenced later on in the episode. Students would go up to a rabbi and say, "Hey, can I follow you? Can I learn from you?" Jesus is calling followers like a prophet does, like Elijah does, where he says, "Elisha, I want you. You come after me. You follow me, Elisha." And that's the same experience that Peter has. So I love this scene. Love how they reminisce about their marriage. For anyone who's in ministry, the idea of a partner who is just supportive of you and wants to be part of what God's doing in your life and the calling that he's put on your life, that's a very emotional, amazing thing to see portrayed in the show. And then we're introduced to Thomas and Rama, and we see that Thomas is presented as a very precise, careful, counting person. Rama is kind of a business partner with him, but we get a little bit of a romantic tension feel here. And they're just talking about how they're going to be handling this wedding job that they've got, where they're providing food and drink for this wedding. So that kind of sets up what's to come. We know there's a little bit of conflict going on between these families. One family is a little bit more well off than the other. They're not quite sure about the family that their daughter's marrying into. And so the family whose son is marrying this richer daughter really wants to give a good impression for them. We go to Simon and Andrew, who are finding their way to Jesus and the other followers. They don't want to let Jesus down. I love these kind of insights into personal feelings. You can imagine that the disciples felt some very similar things, saying, hey, we don't know what to expect. How do we make Jesus happy? I really felt this to say, like, hey, if Jesus called me, I just want to make sure everything was right. And you just don't know. And they kind of talk about how all they're going to need to do is just sit and watch. Just like they learned how to fish from their father, they're now going to sit and watch Jesus and learn how to fish for people. So then we see some of the disciples. I know that some people have said that they have trouble identifying which disciple is which. So I just grabbed this little screenshot here, and you can see you have James the Less, you have Thaddeus, you have James and John, who are brothers. And of course, we have Simon and Andrew that we've seen earlier in the scene. Now, it's important to note that in the second season, the part of Big James was recast. So you just have to get familiar with James, as he looks a little bit different in the second season. But as you're trying to keep track of which disciple is which, hopefully that helps a little bit. Like that Mary references, hey, I know some carpenter language and I can help talk to a carpenter. Of course, she's married to a carpenter. She has a son who's a carpenter, probably even more than one child is a carpenter. And she references that here. I love that Jesus talks about himself as a clumsy teen who cracked his head open when he visited this family that they're going to a wedding for. I love that insight into his person. We know that Jesus experienced human life just as we did, yet he was without sin. So that means that Jesus can make mistakes. He can have accidents. He can be clumsy. He can tell a joke and somebody cannot get it. And we see that in this show. And I think that's a great thing about showing how Jesus brought the presence of God to our lives so we can understand it. And we know that Mary references her pregnancy here and the different circumstances of her marriage. Of course, we know all about that story from the beginning of Luke and the beginning of Matthew. We just described here how they have the plan to serve the best wine first and then the lesser wine after the folks have had enough to drink and enough to eat that they don't really notice, reduced to the concept of the master of the banquet. So all that's important for what's happened later on. Go back to Nicodemus and John the Baptist. John the Baptist references Proverbs 30 verse 4 here, and talks about the oracle of Agor and how God has a son, and do you know his name? And Nicodemus says, well, God's son is Israel, and this is a conflict that's going on in their day as they figure out who Jesus is and who the Messiah is. Jesus claims to be the Son of God. Is it really the Son of God, or is it just Israel? And then John the Baptist also references something Jesus says in John 3:20, saying, hey, Nicodemus, are you willing to open up your life to the light, or are you going to stay asleep in the dark? And, there's still that tension, that back and forth between the two of them. But Nicodemus is honestly seeking, and John the Baptist is excited to hear that Jesus is beginning to reveal himself and willing to share that with others. Love the moment of Jesus and his mother hugging. We hear this, we see this dance, and we hear the song that's taken from Jeremiah chapter 33, verse 11, about the bridegroom and the bride, their voices and the singing in the streets of Jerusalem. I love that little reference there. As we go on to the wedding, we see the disciples kind of processing, oh, here we are with Jesus. What's happening? Jesus does a magic trick for the children. Love seeing Jesus hang out with the children. We get this nice little interlude with Thaddeus talking to the disciples and to Mary, talking about a construction job that he had in Bethsaida where he met Jesus, and Jesus was working on a latrine. Another great example of how Jesus is a human being just like us. He's putting in a ramp so that people can get to the latrine, and they begin talking about, well, why doesn't Jesus heal everyone? And it has something to do with it not being his time. How do we know when his time is? How do he decide what to do, what miracles to do, and what miracles not to do? Something that they're talking through and they're trying to figure out. Jesus has his timing. And Mary Magdalene references a concept in John chapter 3 that Jesus talks about, which is the wind blows and we don't always understand where it comes from, where it's going. We just have to learn from it. And Mary says, hey, we're just going to sit and watch Jesus forever. It's what our job's going to be in this world, is we're just going to watch him and learn from who he is at all times. So they're about to do the dance of Miriam, the song of Miriam, which is found in Exodus chapter 15. It's a song that celebrated the marriage of God and his people. And so it was used in weddings, something they would sing and dance to. And they discover that they don't have wine. They don't have enough wine for the wedding. It's a conflict that they've seen coming. What are they going to do? And we get this idea of stone vessels being pure. And so Jesus is going to use those to make the wine that they're going to use. And then we have this image of stone that we get from Thaddeus, where he says, hey, once you make that cut in the stone, there's no going back. The stone's beginning its journey, and it's a journey of choices for it becoming the vessel that it's meant to be. And we get that juxtaposed with Jesus. He's making the cut in his ministry that changes everything, where he's going to announce himself to the world. Also, love how Mary says to Jesus, if not now, when? Great connection between this scene and the beginning of the episode. And so he tells Thomas, hey, I love that you ask questions, but it's not always going to be logical. It's not always going to be that way. He references Matthew, who's also that very precise, careful person, and he invites Thomas to follow him, to join him. We see that in this episode. Thaddeus hears from Jesus, hey, join me, and we're going to build a foundation, a fortress that's more than anything that human beings can. Hey, Thomas, join me, and I'll teach you how to count in a new way. Just as he said to Simon and Andrew and James and John, join me and I'll teach you how to fish for people. Jesus is taking the very common things in our lives and saying, hey, you've been given a calling from God. And that's really important to see. So then we have this great moment where Jesus turns the water into wine. We see that moment where he prays to the Father, and the Father responds to his request and turns the water into wine. It's brought to the master of the banquet. And the master of the banquet announces to everyone the honor that should be given to this family because they've saved the best until last. And that's exactly how it would appear in the scriptures when you read about it in John chapter 2. It was unexpected this would happen, but it demonstrates something about who Jesus is, that he's got more than enough for us. He gives them more than enough wine that they need, and that he's always saving the best till last. And he does this because he cares about this family and just wants them to receive the honor and not have the embarrassment of running out of wine. So I love this finally, I love the little joke that was made about Andrew not being a good dancer. And Jesus says, hey, some things even I can't do. And that's to cure Andrew's poor dancing. Just love those kind of little humor that's put in the show. Jesus shows humor in the Gospels, so that's very appropriate. And then finally, this last scene where Thomas and Rayma are watching Jesus go, and Thomas said, hey, he invited us to come join him in Samaria, and I just don't know what to think. And Rayma says, hey, don't think. Don't think, just accept what it is that God's doing. That kind of idea, the wind blowing and Jesus doing something that we may understand. We just have to follow along. We have to watch. We have to just seek him. That's what this episode is all about, that we can trust Jesus and that he will honor that trust. So I really enjoyed it. Hope you did too.